My name is Luke Kruger. I lead Monitor Deloitte Africa, the strategy practice of Deloitte. Our practice covers a range of strategy-related services where we assist clients in making the right decisions around their where to play and how to win choices, and further think through how to organize around capabilities and management systems to enable their strategy. I'm very excited to introduce this three-part series where we will cover Save to Thrive, an emerging market perspective, the topic of today's discussion, embedding sustainability and creating shared value, exploring how organizations can embed sustainability in their business, and why, when done well, this has the potential to create long-term value. And then lastly, growth in turbulent times, exploring how organizations can grow in the current market conditions.
My name is Andrew Lane. I'm a director at Monitor Deloitte, which is Deloitte's dedicated strategy practice. I also lead the energy, resources and industrials practice for Deloitte in Africa. And I'm here to talk to you about embedding sustainability into business strategy and core operations. Firstly, why did we decide to do this? Sustainability is not a new concept, nor is ESG. However, COVID-19 has certainly highlighted the interconnectedness between business and society. It's demonstrated the role that business can play in developing solutions for global crises and how to partner with institutions and competitors. It's also accelerating new ways of working, new ways of behaving and operating. And the need for resilience has also been clearly highlighted through COVID-19 and the need for customers to be more resilient to external shocks and black swan events. This is the first in a 6-part series exploring how organizations can embed sustainability into their business strategies core operations. In this video, we will set the context and explore why sustainability should be a Csuite issue. And in the rest of the series, we'll explore aspects of economic and social sustainability, environmental stability, as well as the role of incentives, supply chains, and company boards. So why is sustainability a Csuite issue? First of all, it touches on every aspect of the business and the tone needs to come from the top. It's not just an HR matter or a corporate affairs matter, which is just done for the sake of compliance. It needs to be integral to our strategy and how we do business. The post-COVID recovery needs to have sustainability at its core. It's a rare opportunity for business leaders to rethink their entire business model and bounce back stronger and more resilient. It provides an opportunity to reflect on and align with our corporate purpose, invest in innovation and develop new ideas for sustainability. We often think about regulation as being the key driver of sustainability, but it's more than that. Customers are more and more attuned to sustainability. They're increasingly looking to companies to demonstrate more sustainable values, either through their operations or through their product ranges. Investors are becoming more demanding and demanding stronger ESG credentials, and companies with stronger ESG credentials tend to be more healthy and more profitable and generate more sustainable returns. Investors are recognizing this and are increasingly seeking ESG as a criteria for making investment decisions. It's more than just compliance. There is value beyond compliance. It's not just about stakeholder benefit, it's also about shareholder benefit. There is benefit to shareholders in doing the right thing for stakeholders, and it's been demonstrated that companies that are better at ESG are generally better performers. Welcome to the second part in our 6-part series on embedding sustainability into business strategy and core operations. I'm joined by Csuite and we're going to talk about the business case for social sustainability. Csuite is a director in Monitor Deloitte, our dedicated strategy practice. He leads our shared value offering with a particular focus on enterprise and supplier development as well as supplier transformation. Welcome, Csuite.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Really excited to engage in this conversation, really an important one for our clients. And I think we're finding that increasingly it is being elevated to the C-suite.
Why is it important that companies should think about social and economic sustainability?
I think it's because increasingly society is questioning the legitimacy of business and asking some simple questions around, for example, is business prospering at the expense of society? Is it there to add value only to the shareholders? So with those questions coming up, it becomes important for organizations to think about how can they be able to address society's most pressing problems while at the same time being able to deliver on the business value? And I think we've seen that, for example, in terms of our global sustainability survey, that 95% of companies are saying that when they've prioritized sustainability in their corporate strategy, they've been able to realize growth in revenue, they've been able to realize improvement in profitability, and more importantly, they have much more stronger relationships with their customers and stakeholders.
Has COVID changed the way we think about this?
I think it has. So in two ways. Firstly, those that really have embraced the shared value principles, we're asking themselves the question of how can they be able to leverage their global supply chains, as an example, to be able to support communities, to be able to support the government. So in South Africa, for example, we saw a number of companies coming forward to be able to promote how they can utilize their supply chains to fast track the procurement of some of the key PPEs. And that was really around doing good with your supply chain, especially the international supply chain. The second thing that it has done is that organizations are increasingly thinking about the fact that long global supply chains are prone to disruptions, as we've had within COVID. So how do they balance the role of local supply chains as well as global supply chains to be able to have a much more resilient business? So we've seen organizations increasingly looking at how they can be able to support the growth of local supply chains, looking at the role of communities that are much more closer to them so that they can be a more collaborative and a lot more beneficial relationship for both the communities and the business.
Is there a trade-off between sustainable and responsible business on the one hand and profitability on the other? Or can you do both?
You can certainly do both. So if we really go back to the thinking of what shared value is, it really says that you are looking at how you can solve society's biggest challenges as your core, and while doing that, deliver on business value. So if we take a typical example that a lot of people are familiar with, is that if we look at how discovery has played a role with vitality, is that delivering on healthy society is their core. And that's a society's significant problem. And while doing it, they're able to deliver business value. We've also seen it within, for example, within environments where mining companies are operating within communities. And if they're able to preempt and be proactive in addressing the shared value question, then they have a good relationship with their stakeholders, they have minimal disruptions within their operations, and therefore it becomes a win-win rather than it being seen as a cost and a trade-off.
Are there examples of companies that have been successful in implementing strategies that are both delivering community impact as well as business benefit?
Absolutely. Within the South African space, we have seen, particularly if we start within the mining sector, large organizations that are coming together to be able to realize more value than if each one of them went on their own. So they're able to pursue much larger projects. They're able to think about what are the projects that they can deliver that are beyond the life of their operations and therefore have a lot more sustainability. And as they bring other social partners, even from a development funding perspective, the cost of delivering on that shared value is spread and therefore a lot more affordable for them. We've also seen it, for example, on the consumer side, that businesses that are looking at how they can be able to address society's problem have shared value as a competitive advantage. So not so much as a cost, but we are able to see them. And I think Discovery, again, being a typical example within the South African space, and really has been honored at a global level, has been able to drive society's most pressing challenges while delivering business value and really using it as a competitive advantage.
Welcome to the third in our 6-part series on embedding sustainability into business strategy and core operations. I'm joined by Mark Victor, and we're going to be talking about why companies need to think about business sustainability. Mark is a director in our sustainability practice in Deloitte Risk Advisory, and he has a particular focus on environmental sustainability and risk. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Andrew. Happy to be here and excited about the topic. I think the reality of the market is that there's increasing pressure being placed on clients to really understand the sustainability drivers in their business, and we're seeing significant increase in focus and the need to really consider it as part of your strategy.
Why do organizations need to see sustainability as a core driver of performance?
I think, Andrew, it really goes to the heart of business purpose or corporate purpose. So, ultimately we talk about, as corporates, we talk about, our business and purpose and what we're there for, our core vision, etc. But ultimately that's got to be a more holistic view. So when we think about corporate purpose, is it going beyond profit, considering people and planet more holistically? Is there a long-term and more sustainable vision on business performance, taking a much more holistic approach about the future, what the future of energy and other dimensions are? We're definitely seeing a greater focus on integrated thinking, and that's being driven quite significantly by the key stakeholders out there, even beyond investor stakeholders, including communities and the public. And it's becoming a critical business driver, and therefore it's essential to be thinking about it holistically when we're considering the business strategy of the organization.
What are some of the key sustainability value drivers that organizations should consider when building their business strategy?
I think just to start, organizations need to take quite an integrated approach to things. The problem as I see in the market is that too many organizations are sort of focusing on little bits of the pie, whether it's recycling or trying to focus on their energy consumption. But for me, it's really critical to think holistically about the organization. The clear key driver is around climate, and that's obviously receiving a lot of attention. So what are the strategies that the organization needs to think about in terms of its future view on its environmental impact? Clearly, the pressure is on decarbonizing businesses, but you've also got to go beyond that. So if you think about efficiency of use of raw materials, where are you getting the materials from? How are you focusing on reducing waste in your production and your value chain? What about recycling and considering how you can reuse those in the environment that you work in? So there are lots of opportunities to really think holistically. The other element that has received a lot of focus is clearly the social impact. So a lot of focus on staff and the social return on investment that clients are making. But we need to think about communities. Some corporates and some industries are much more sort of aware of the communities they work in, but others are not as holistically considering that. Lastly, I think it's about the opportunities. So what we're seeing is that there are lots of adjacent business opportunities that businesses need to be thinking about that are beyond their current opportunities. The green economy and sustainable business is introducing some significant opportunities for clients to take advantage of into the future.
Cape Town water crisis had a major impact on business. Were there some lessons learned? How are businesses building resilience into their response going forward?
I think, Andrew, that's a great example of an actual resilience event or a disruption. And I guess it points out, probably too much of a short-term focus. Whilst communities and municipalities are clearly considering things like water, the reality is that it's not just their problem. So, what it demonstrated is that the impact of climate and some of these external risks have a real impact on businesses, on the communities that they serve, and they actually have to take a proactive approach. Another great example would be the fact that a number of the areas in Cape Town are built on a fault line. So our business is really thinking about the potential impact. Another area for me that's quite interesting, in reflecting the current, in terms of the current crisis, is the level of resilience that clients have demonstrated, or potentially the lack of resilience. There needs to be a much deeper understanding of the potential impacts of disruption on organizations. And what we've seen is that the organizations that were more prepared have been quick to respond. It's also emphasized the need for broader scenario modeling and more proactive strategies for resilience. A very good example of that is the global supply chain, where organizations that were prepared have managed to respond to the supply chain challenges, and those that haven't are facing supply chain gaps.
Which sectors do you think will be most impacted by environmental change, and what do they need to do differently?
Andrew, I think every single sector has an impact. Additionally, ERI or energy and resources has been top of that list. So clearly, there's some big challenges they having to address from an energy or decarbonization perspective. I think the other areas where possibly a bit of effort has been expended are consumer and TMT. Consumer clients are clearly facing quite a lot of focus on from their customers, and there's a need to really look at the use of scarce resources, recycling and waste management, as well as the social agenda. I think in terms of some of the other areas, the reality is that the efforts that need to be put in are going to impact on operating costs. There's obviously going to be changes in the economics of the firms and also opportunities that are presented, new businesses, new operating models that really can come to the fore. So for me, the changes in customer behavior are starting to drive and impact business viability, and organizations really need to proactively look at it. For me, changes to customer behavior is really beginning to directly impact business viability, and organizations can't ignore those challenges. And even in the financial services industry, the TCFD is really driving a focus on the impact of climate on corporate risk and strategies. A great example of that is, some of the lending that banks provide to agricultural and other entities that may be impacted in the future on climate.
How are companies innovating and changing their business models and their operations?
If I take a South African view, Andrew, the South African economy is built on fossil fuel. One of the biggest things that we see happening quite significantly is the transition. So, it's changing the energy mix, it's decarbonizing, it's looking at new business opportunities. But I think also that companies need to embrace innovation to drive change. If you look at the significant increase in focus on electric vehicles and the future of mobility, if we look at the pressure on plastics and a number of other areas, those are pressure from stakeholders that's driving innovation. I think going to drive new innovations in battery technology, new innovations in minerals and metals, and that's going to be positive for innovation and new business. In addition, there's really different ways that organizations are adopting approaches. So focusing on issuing green bonds to be able to drive, much more of a responsible financing focus, crowdsourcing funding for sustainability projects, driving circular economy initiatives like recycling. And then there's obviously a lot of opportunities, as I mentioned, in terms of decarbonizing the businesses, no matter what business you're in. So for me, there's a lot of opportunities, and companies need to obviously really change the way that they do things. It is, as I mentioned earlier, quite significantly driven by stakeholder expectations. So we're starting to see a lot more stakeholder activism beyond just investors, the venture capital funds, as well as the individuals, the customers, the communities. And governments are having to really respond to that, and corporates are close behind that. Welcome to the fourth discussion in our 6-part series on embedding sustainability into business strategy and core operations. I'm joined by Mahindra Dedasania, and we're talking about the impact of climate change on supply chain and business performance. Mahindra is a director in our supply chain and networks practice at Deloitte Africa. He's also the lead of our infrastructure and capital projects practice, and it's focused on driving sustainability from a supply chain perspective. Welcome, Mahindra.
Thank you, Andrew. Glad to be here and look forward to our discussions today.
Why is supply chain management such an important part of building a successful, sustainable business?
The sustainability in supply chain is important because 90% of an organization's carbon footprint is being generated through end-to-end supply chain activities. And this activity starts from sourcing of raw materials, doing the bulk transportation of those raw materials to the manufacturing facilities, and then actually having outbound logistics for the finished products and distribution of those finished products to either business to business or business to customers. And if you look at this value chain, all the elements have an impact on sustainability from supply chain perspective. But business now have accepted that sustainability in supply chain is the future of tomorrow. If we look at actually the different elements in supply chain sustainability perspective, and if we model a different scenarios based on social, environmental, and economic view, the sustainability in supply chain becomes quite scary. Because each business wants to drive a better efficiency, better agility, better productivity to achieve both supply chain effectiveness and the business performance. And since this model or scenario is quite scary, business has started finding different ways to reconfigure their operations, to redesign their supply chain, and to identify the right business partners who can contribute positively towards a greater sustainability. What we are seeing now in the market, Andrew, is the large corporates have integrated their sustainability strategy into procurement strategy, and they change the selection criteria for selection of their supply chain partners, which previously they were only focused based on cost or cost and capability, but now they are focused on ESG performance. They want their partners to do the responsible sourcing. So there is a wider awareness from the business perspective to understand the impact of supply chain on the sustainability perspective, and that's why I believe supply chain is a key role player in building a successful and sustainable business.
What is the impact of climate change on supply chain and business performance?
From the environment perspective, if we look at one of the significant elements which can disrupt the supply chain is the climate change. And this is because of the increased frequency of extreme weather, which is changing because of the climate change. This is disturbing the entire manufacturing downstream, and it has ultimately severe impact on both production cost and profitability. The problem here is, Andrew, if we, in last couple of decades, the way we have designed the manufacturing assets, the manufacturing facilities, or the way we have constructed it, it is not able to withstand the current impact of climate change in terms of increased frequency of extreme weather. And because of this, if something goes wrong to the manufacturing assets or manufacturing operations, which disrupt entire supply chain effectiveness and it disrupts the business performance. And Andrew, I will give you a simple example of rare earth metals, particularly neodymium and praseodymium, which are widely used in many industries, such as manufacturing, technology, our new trends of electric vehicles, medical industries, or defense industries. And the large production of these rare earth metal, Andrew, is in a couple of countries. And those are India, China, Australia, Vietnam, Brazil, USA, or Russia. And if we look at the impact of climate change in these countries in terms of increased frequency of floods, increased frequency of storms, droughts, and fire, this is also increasing day by day. We are observing for a couple of decades, but it's also increasing day by day. And because of these disruptions, if availability of the rare earth material becomes difficult to the manufacturing industries across the globe, that can disrupt the entire supply chain. Definitely there is a loss of revenue and loss of profitabilities, but it disrupts the entire production planning, disrupts the entire production strategy across the globe. It also, Andrew, has a cascading impact on many other sub-industries, which are also dependent on few primary users of rare earth metals. So I think fighting against this climate change only left with one option, Andrew, and that is to decarbonize our supply chain. So we need to fight against this climate change to improve the supply chain sustainability.
What role can technology play?
That's an interesting question, Andrew. And if you look at the advanced technology, it plays a very crucial role in a couple of ways to make both supply chain more efficient and more sustainable. So let's look at a couple of examples. So blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and predictive analytics helps for the selection of the partner based on the ESG performance. This also helps to gain transparency at the supplier level to monitor their constant commitment and contributions towards ESG performance or towards the sustainability. And this technology, Andrew, can help us to find the intelligent collaborations between the various supply chain partners, achieve the greater efficiency in the supply chain, and make the supply chain more intelligent using this technology to make the supply chain more sustainable. The second is, Andrew, the climate change now started demanding alteration in both production technology and manufacturing technology. So if we use this emerging green technology in manufacturing industries at both the level, at technology level as well as at system level, this can help us to improve the predictive maintenance. This can help us to improve energy efficiency and definitely to achieve better productivity. From the production technology perspective, if we use the right technology which can improve the moisture control, improve the temperature control, improve the dust and noise control, this has a direct impact on the cost or safety hazards. So now business has started IoT-based predictive maintenance, started thinking about alternate production planning, the production strategy, and identifying the technology which can use the less water, for example, which can use the less power, which can use the recycle of materials or recycle of resources. So technology is playing a wider role here. And the last example, Andrew, what we are seeing here is large corporates has started thinking to co-invest with the raw material suppliers in technology to improve the process efficiency, to improve the energy efficiencies, to find the ways to use the low carbon fuels. And they are thinking about using the different production methods, the different production technologies, which can ultimately help us to decarbonize the end-to-end supply chain. So in the end, Andrew, the power of this advanced technology, whether it is AI, blockchain, 3D printing, IoT, or making our digital supply chain a connected supply chain, which helps us to bring the ethical responsibility, helps us to create a greater visibility across end-to-end supply chain management, and it helps us to enhance more collaborations across all ecosystem partners, which ultimately improves supply chain sustainability through technology. So technology has a vital role to play in improving sustainability.
What are companies doing? What examples are you seeing in industry?
I think industry started realizing, Andrew, now fighting against the climate change is to decarbonize our end-to-end supply chain, and that is must. They also started realizing actually the goal of achieving net zero emission has no impact on cost and productivity. But it is actually they started redesigning their supply chain. They've now focused in reducing the emissions by finding the ways to find the alternate supply chain, and they started leveraging the ecosystem partnerships to create the competitive advantage in a sustained focused world.
Welcome to our fifth discussion in our series on embedding sustainability into business strategy and core operations. I'm joined by Gerard Bolt, and I'll be talking about the tax implications of ESG. Gerard is a senior manager in the Global Innovation and Investment Incentives team in our tax and legals practice. His team provides services related to carbon taxes and energy efficiency tax incentives. Welcome, Gerard.
Hello, Andrew, and thank you very much for the introduction. I must say there's very few things that I'm more passionate about than sharing the outdoors and nature with people. So as a result, sustainability is something that naturally resonates with me. And I've got a particular interest in climate change, and I'm looking very much forward to the conversation.
Sustainability has typically been a subjective matter, but we see it's now getting into the space of clear performance metrics and associated targets. What consideration should companies be given to carbon taxes, and how can they gain competitive advantage through ESG?
Andrew, within sustainability, environmental target setting is undoubtedly the most mature. For example, the amount of water that a company consumes or the tons of waste that goes to landfill, these are very well-defined metrics, and they're also easy to track and trace. In a comparable way, science-based targets and mitigation potential analysis are also creating now clear measures and timeframes for entities to reduce emissions and also prevent irreversible climate change. The most common mitigation measures that countries adopt is either adopt to comply to the national determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, would either be in the form of a carbon tax or through a carbon budget system, very often supported by an emissions trading scheme. In South Africa, we opted for a carbon tax. The initial carbon tax rate appears to be quite low at 120 Rand, but we've already seen that it did cost the consumer in excess of 1.7 billion Rand just through the sales of petrol and diesel alone. And we do know, based on current legislation, that it's likely that this carbon tax rate would increase tenfold by 2030. The cost of doing nothing is simply too much to ignore, and therefore ambitious ESG targets would speak directly to carbon tax reductions and therefore to the financial bottom line. Investors are also focusing, putting a lot more emphasis on the climate change risk for the companies they want to invest in, and as a result, companies are under more pressure to disclose their climate-related risks through frameworks, for example, as the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure.
Globally, we're seeing multinationals sign up for some fairly ambitious targets, things like being carbon neutral by 2050 or being fully renewable by 2030. Do these companies fully comprehend the magnitude of what they're undertaking?
Very often in the climate change fraternity, these long-term pledges, Andrew, is what we call IBG, YBG, or I'll be gone and you'll be gone. And unfortunately, I think a lot of these pledges are made without the full comprehension of the magnitude of the impact. But perhaps COVID could provide us some insights. For example, the World Bank measured that GDP contraction was in the region of 4.3% last year. Over that same period, global emissions reduced to 7%. Now, in South Africa's instance, there's a far greater correlation between economic activity and emissions, and we saw 8.2% GDP contraction based on results from the World Bank, but the associated emissions reductions were only between 9 and 11% based on Climate Action Tracker. So what makes these figures alarming is the fact that they mimic very closely the annual emission reductions that we need to pursue to stay within our 1.5 degree target. Now, it's imperative on this basis, it's imperative that countries as well as companies decouple emissions from their economic activity and maintain a brand ethos of sustainable development. This objective can only be achieved if sustainability is embedded within the core business strategy and operations.
What are we doing on a project-by-project basis?
So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, within their fifth assessment report, proposes 4 different scenarios for mitigation reduction pathways. The first scenario is a scenario that focuses predominantly on the decarbonisation of the energy supply, particularly in the global south. And as a result, this prediction anticipates that at least 70 to 80% of electricity will come from renewable energy sources by 2050. This also happens to be the least cost of the scenarios and the one that's most unlikely to overshoot emission targets. As a result, I believe we can anticipate at least a doubling in renewable energy projects going forward, well, at least in the short term. And I also anticipate that deforestation and reforestation projects would become priority in the medium to long term.
Welcome to the 6th and final discussion in our series on embedding sustainability into business strategy and cooperations. I'm joined by Roweda Redfern, and we'll be talking about the role of the board in governance and ESG goals. Roweda is the chair of the Africa board at Deloitte. She's a chartered accountant by background, and she's worked extensively with boards on good governance. Welcome, Roweda.
Thank you, Andrew.
What do you think the role of the board is in driving ESG objectives? What should they be measuring and what should they be monitoring?
Andrew, the board plays a fundamental role in holding management accountable for achieving ESG objectives. Increasingly, we are seeing investors expecting boards to drive ESG, and we know that companies with stronger ESG credentials are typically better at risk management and are better at generating stable returns. So boards should be constantly scanning the risk universe, identifying new risks. And one of the new risks that they will see is around, things like climate change, etc. There's a saying that if something is not measured, it's not done. And if I have to draw the analogy between, the history of financial reporting and ESG reporting. So typically, if you asked a CEO in January what his December results look like, by the 10th of the month, he is able to tell you exactly what December looked like, how he is tracking against forecast, how he's tracking against budget, and how he is tracking against prior year. He's also able to tell you if he is behind budget, what remedial or corrective action has been taken in order to, to catch up. And that's really where we need to get to from an ESG perspective. So management should be responsible for driving ESG and for setting the targets. The board is responsible for approving those targets. The board is also responsible for ensuring that those targets are met and ensuring that on a quarterly basis, on a timely basis, ESG reporting is being tabled at board level and being discussed as far as where the company is against budget. But of course, we didn't get to where we are with financial reporting overnight. It required changes in systems, it required people development, and it required processes. And a similar process needs to take place as far as ESG reporting is concerned. So boards need to be asking the tough questions around what training do our people need in order to be able to deliver on ESG reporting, what processes need to be put in place insofar as dealing with our suppliers or our customers and drawing that ESG information, as well as what systems need to be put in place to gather that information. Typically, we've seen that ESG type information is not sitting in ERP systems, it's sitting in source documentation, and therefore, it does require new systems to be put in place. But really, this is something that needs to be driven by the board and led by management.
Are you seeing a change in investors' expectations? Is ESG new, or has it just been given a new name?
Investment in sustainability is no longer seen as a trade-off, but instead it is being associated with competitive advantage and with enduring business performance. We are seeing exchanges and funds being created that are ESG linked, and these are investment funds or indices. We also know that the JSE is one of 5 exchanges in the world, in the world and internationally, that is recognized as a pioneer in corporate transparency on ESG issues. We're also seeing that rating agencies are demanding and responding to this demand and publishing ESG and other sustainability metrics.
What are the costs of poor ESG governance?
Andrew, there are many costs associated with poor ESG governance, and to name a few, I would include, loss of access to resources if there are poor community and labor relations, potentially loss of market share due to poor sustainability practices, a decrease in bottom line due to an increase in operational costs as a result of wastage. You might see regulatory and legal interventions in the form of fines, penalties, and enforcement actions. And then potentially productivity decrease as production assets are not efficient or are not efficiently optimized to create more sustainable plant machinery and equipment. And that's just to name a few.
What's Deloitte doing in this regard?
So ESG is top of mind for Deloitte, and we are currently running 3 programs globally. So Andrew, I sit on the Deloitte Global Board, and I can talk with authority here to say that this is being driven from global level and cascaded to the various member firms across the globe. And we have 3 programs in place, including the World Class program, the World Climate program, and the All-In scorecard. And as I said, this is a globally driven program. If you'll allow me to just touch on the World Climate program, for example, World Climate is our strategy for impact internally and with our ecosystem. Our ambition is to lead on climate and achieve net zero emissions by 2030. And of course, this requires, commitment from everyone, including our suppliers. And this is a commitment that we went out and publicly made in Davos. We want to do this in 2 ways. Firstly, we want to impact ourselves, and then secondly, impact the world. The way we want to impact ourselves, as I said, is by achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2030. And secondly, by ensuring that we apply consistent principles and practices and public policy strategy. And again, that's been driven from global and cascaded to the various member firms. We also want to impact the world. We have 300,000 employees across the Deloitte network, across the globe. And we want to have 300,000 people passionate about climate. And those 300,000 people will then go out into society and then start impacting the societies that they live in. And then secondly, we want to engage with stakeholders to address climate and have those discussions with the various stakeholders.
That concludes our discussion on embedding sustainability into business strategy and core operations. Thank you to the panelists, and I certainly hope that everybody enjoyed the conversation and found it useful. The key theme that we try to get across is that sustainability is no longer just a compliance issue. It's no longer just the preserve of an HR department or a corporate affairs department which is charged with compliance to regulation. It cuts across all elements of social impact, environmental impact, and good governance. And in order to achieve the targets that we need to achieve, it has to be a core business issue. It has to be built in to the purpose of our business and the way we do business. Deloitte has a suite of services and offerings that cover all of the issues covered on the series. The contact details of all of our panelists are on the screen right now. We encourage you to reach out to us if there's any way that we can help, and please do get in contact. Thank you.